Good afternoon and welcome back to the Life of a Dev. Today we're going to be hopping back into Sponge and we're going to be discussing basic config files. So configs are used quite a bit, as I imagine you would know, to just configure literally anything in a program that can be changed. And so you can see that I added a couple things to our test command file. So you have to inject a default config path, which the shared root equals true means that it'll give you something. I'll look that up. And then I have a public static normal path, which can be accessed by any other file in our test command program. And then the public static string prefix is the prefix that we're going to be storing in our config. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to create the actual config file. What I like to do is make it into a util folder. That way we can use it for any other stuff that we might need. So we'll load that up. So first I'm going to make a couple private static variables. I'm going to get a logger. I'm going to get a configuration loader, and it's going to be of the commented configuration node type. I'm going to call it config loader, and then we're going to get the configuration node. And then we're going to have to import all of this. Just do that. There we go. Okay, so now that we got that, we're going to need to create 3 methods that we're going to be able to run. So we're going to do init, which is where we initialize it, a load, which is where we can load data from it, and then the save, which is where we save any dynamic data back to it. And so we are going to start off with the init, because that's going to be the first thing that's run. So we're going to assign the logger using a logger factory. Get logger, and we're going to put in just command config. So that'll get us a logger, and then anytime it runs, it'll add this prefix to it so we can tell exactly what it's telling us. We're going to get the file config, which this is where we use our normal config. I'm going to put that to string. And we have to import file, of course. And then we're going to actually load a config loader. We want to use a hocon configuration loader. We'll get the builder. Set the path to be testcommand.normalconfig. So that's just the public variable. And then we're going to build it. So now we have our config file and our config loader. The config file isn't necessarily going to exist. Obviously the first time you run it, it doesn't have a config loaded. So we're going to test to see if the config doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist, then we have to create a new one. So we're going to want an input stream, which is going to be null for now, and then an output stream. So since it might fail when you try to create it, we're gonna encapsulate it in a catch That way if it does fail, it's not actually going to break everything. Use the java.io for those. Okay. So, in the try, we're going to try to assign the stream config.class that get resource as stream, and then we're going to put in the name of the config that we want, which we will be creating an example config in just a second in the resources folder. So we are going to call it exampleconfig.com. We're going to create a variable called readBytes, and then we're going to create a byte buffer of size 4096. And then we're also going to assign the outstream to a config.getAbsolutePath. And we're going to have to import a bunch of stuff while we're doing this. So then while I could spell things right, it would be going a little bit better. And created new config. So basically what this does is it goes into the example config and reads it out and then writes it to the new config file. So basically it just reads through it, transfers it over, and then it's going to save it. That's all there is to it. So we're going to do a finally clause, and we're going to catch an IO exception here, which we're just going to print the stack trace. We're going to do two of these little blocks here. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to close this stream. If it isn't closed, it can cause some issues down the line, so it's just best to make sure that it gets closed. And the finally clause for a try statement is always going to happen, so no matter what, if the streams are open, they will be closed. Yeah. Oh, put that in the wrong spot. Put that there. Print stack trace. So now that we have that all set, this will should log out that we're starting, or get the logger. It'll get the file, get the config loader all set up. If it doesn't exist, it's going to read from an example config, and it will write to the new config. So what we'll go and do now is actually create the example config. So you just right click on the resources, new file, and then you're going to want an example config.conf. You want it to match the name that you put in there exactly. And so for this, I'm going to do prefix will equal test command. So that's really all we need for that part. We do still have a couple error or warnings, but that's okay. So now we're going to hop down onto load, and so this is going to load in all the stuff that we need. Again, we're going to run this in a try, so that way in case it fails, it won't cause any problems as far as crashing the server and all that good stuff. Yeah, print stack trace. So this is when we're actually going to use a node. So the config loader should be loaded. If you do .load, it will give you a commented configuration node, which is what we want. And then, since the only thing we have in there, we're going to do test command.prefix will equal the node.get string, well, node.get node. And since all we have is the prefix, that's all we're going to do, and then we're going to do a .get string, which will return us the string and assign it to the prefix in here so that all of our other files can use it. And since that's the only thing we actually have for our simple config, we're just going to do the logger info loaded config, so that way you know if it loaded successfully. And again, it will have this test command config in front of it, so you don't have to worry about telling where it came from and ensuring that it's yours. So then we're going to hop down on the save, which is going to be the same way. We're going to do another try statement, just in case. I'll put on the check states, and then we'll do the node.get node prefix set value test command.prefix. And you do config loader save node logger.info saved config. So basically what you're doing here is you're just getting the node prefix again, and then you're doing the .set value, which is pretty much you're just setting the value, and then we're using the test command prefix. So if you were to make a command that allowed you to change the prefix, then when you did a config.save, it would automatically update, and then, or config.load after save, then it would automatically update. You can also make a public static void reload, which you can do with this load, not this. Or you can do a save into a load, which will basically just save all this stuff, and then it'll reload it so that it will reassign the test command prefix. So then it will actually update as soon as you call this config reload function that we just made. And so now that we have that all set, we need to hop on over to our main file again. Sorry if you can hear that train in the background. So first we need to assign the normal config variable to the default config. That's just to make one of these public while the other one that's injected isn't actually used. So we're going to do config.init and a config.load. This is all done on the on-server init so that it's done before the server actually starts, which is generally where they should be loaded. So now, theoretically, what I'm going to do is do a safe catch, so that in the case that this fails, the prefix just gets set to nothing instead of getting returned as an error all the way back up. So if we go back into our test command executor, there's that. So you can do the test command.prefix to tack it on in there, and then it will show up. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to build this, pop on over to the server. So here we are on the server. It did have a have to change a couple things with the server itself, not the plugin. But as you can see, we're back here running SpongeForge 1.10.2, in case you forgot. And so we're going to go ahead and use our command, test command. As you can see, we now have the test command prefix attached to all of our messages that we use with that. And so next week we will look into subcommands and being able to utilize everything. Subcommands and being able to utilize them to change config settings, as well as just actual subcommands, setting permissions per subcommand, and stuff like that. So that's just something to look forward to as well for next week. So I hope you all enjoyed. If you guys have any suggestions for me, please let me know, and have a good afternoon. Bye.